Shields up, Iron Breakers. Rurikhan here coming at you with another video fresh out of E3 2015. And what better way to start the coverage on that event than to give you guys what I'm pretty sure most of you are excited about in my channel, which is Dark Souls 3. What did I see while I was out there, and what can I tell you, and what are my opinions on the things that I saw? So first, let me just tell you guys that I kind of called it in my previous video when I said that it was going to be shown at one of the big press conferences like Sony or Microsoft. I believe the first one that I said in my video was Microsoft because I was pretty sure that Microsoft was, kind of struggling a little bit for their presentation. So I kind of thought that Dark Souls 3 would really bring a little bit of a boom to that one. And it kind of did. It was revealed at their press conference. Obviously, it's not exclusive to Xbox One. As a matter of fact, they didn't even announce any exclusive content. They just did the reveal. But anyway, beyond that, once that was announced, I called up my contact at Bandai Namco America, and I said, look, here's the deal. I'm going to see Dark Souls 3. I just need you to tell me when. So that was kind of how that conversation went. And he told me to show up there at their booth at around 3 p.m. on Tuesday, I believe, which was like the first day of E3. And I was like, sweet, because I actually had an opening at that time. So that was perfect. And when I got there, I actually got to meet a lot of the people from the Dark Souls community. It was really amazing. I know I'm going to miss out on a couple of names here, but I met Beef Beaverson, which I wanted to meet him for the longest of times ever since we met up at the launch of Dark Souls Prepare to Die in that ridiculous PvP encounter that when I thought he was an NPC, and that was awesome. So I wanted to meet him for a long time. Got to meet him while I was out there. That was pretty cool. Also got to meet a German spy. Got to meet Ouroboros, which, let me tell you, Ouroboros is nothing like I pictured him. Got to meet Dreaded Cone, Dave Control, and who else did I meet? I don't know. I met so many people while I was out there. I'm really sorry if I'm not mentioning your name, but just like I met a ton of people from the Dark Souls community right before we got our presentation, which was done by Miyazaki. Speaking of which, I also met Miyazaki while I was in line to get my my bracelet for the Sony press conference. So that was pretty cool. I was not expecting Miyazaki himself to be making the presentation because I have seen in the past presentations about Dark Souls 2 and Bloodborne, and he didn't present any of those games. So I thought, like, Miyazaki's just like the behind the scenes figure. He doesn't really want to be in the limelight. But no, in Dark Souls 3, he was just like kind of there. He was the one doing the presentation. Obviously, he did the presentation in Japanese, and then there was someone there to translate for him. And something that I noticed, which is something that we will be talking about as I discuss, as I go through my notes that I have here from that presentation, is the fact that Miyazaki almost didn't acknowledge the existence of Dark Souls 2 in a way. I mean, he briefly mentioned it here and there, but there were a couple of things that just like really blew my mind of just how much disconnected he was with Dark Souls 2, which I think is going to be good news for a lot of Dark Souls players. Even though, again, I'm not one of those Dark Souls players that hates Dark Souls 2, but I do kind of prefer Dark Souls 1 and Bloodborne to Dark Souls 2. But yeah, I guess a lot of the community are really not into Dark Souls 2, and I guess those people are going to be really happy because a lot of the stuff that I have seen is much more in line with what we've come to expect from Dark Souls 1 as well as Bloodborne. So let's get things started. I'm going to go through my notes here, and they are very unorganized because, I mean, you're at a presentation, you're listening to Miyazaki speak Japanese, and you're trying to take notes as fast as you possibly can. So a lot of the stuff here might be, I don't know, I don't even remember a big portion of the presentation already because I've seen so much stuff while I was at E3. But yeah, let's just get started because I've been recording for a while now and I haven't even gotten into the really juicy details, right? So, okay, first thing about Dark Souls 3, one of the things that he wanted to emphasize was the fact that it is the first Souls game. I mean, the first Dark Souls game, because Bloodborne was also like this, that is exclusively on current generation systems. This means PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. He didn't mention anything about release dates or if the PC is going to be earlier or later than the consoles. None of that was mentioned during the presentation. The graphics were looking pretty damn good. I'm talking about like Bloodborne levels of detail, but with the art style Actually, the art style seems like a mix between Dark Souls 1 and Bloodborne, because it was a little bit of gothic architecture in the architecture in the levels that in the level that we've seen, because we only seen one level in that presentation. They were actually playing the game in front of us, but there was no UI, which was something I really wanted to see, like, because I couldn't tell if the guy playing the game was actually locking onto every single target or not, because again, there were no UI elements there that allowed us to see that kind of stuff. So yeah, I was really curious to see if the movement was going to be slower if he was locked on, but I don't know if he was locked on or not during that. So beyond the really good looking graphics that we had, they were aiming for 30 FPS, even though the demo that we were watching wasn't locked. So I believe I probably saw the frames go anywhere between from 20 to 45 or something like that, or maybe 20 to 50. They weren't really hitting 60, but they were unlocked, so they were a little bit all over the place. But their goal is to aim for a 30 FPS, just like Bloodborne. There is an improvement on the physics engine, so you get all the cloth and all that stuff, just like, you know, animating properly with the wind and all of that. And something that I've noticed, which could be due to the fact that they were only showing the demo and obviously not the final version of the game, because the game's not done yet. But something that I noticed was that the loading times were actually pretty fast from the point that you die to the point where you're back into the game. The loading times are pretty damn fast. I'm not sure which platform they were playing in. I want to say it was a PlayStation 4, but again, I'm not 100% sure on that. So what else can I tell you guys about the game? The date of early 2016 is confirmed. I mean, as a matter of fact, that image that I showed you in the previous video, where it was just like the Dark Souls character kneeling down in early 2016, that image was shown prominently throughout our presentation, as well as I believe it was probably throughout some portions of the show floor. But it's like the show floor is like just one big blur to me at this point. And beyond the whole thing of early 2016, it is obviously being directed by Miyazaki-san. As a matter of fact, it almost seems like Miyazaki kind of was trying to set his foot down and saying, no, I'm in control of the Dark Souls franchise now. That's kind of like the feel I got from the presentation that he was giving. Next, I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about the lore, but as you guys know, I'm not the best person to talk about lore, but the lore that I got from what they were discussing during the presentation, there is a high emphasis on an apocalyptic world, so some kind of an apocalyptic event took place. I'm not sure if it's going to be, you know, again, there's no, the time is convoluted. Is it convoluted? Distorted. The flow of time is distorted throughout most of Dark Souls game. So there is no direct correlation at this point that I can draw from Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2, whatever. They say that they're doing an evolution and a deepening of the concept of the Souls series, but the story will revolve around the Lords of Cinder, who are supposed to be iconic heroes of the series. So one of the things that you see in the trailer, like the huge dude with like a big ass cleaver, that's like one of the Lords of Cinder. So this indicates a couple of things here, which is, I mean, in Dark Souls 1, the Lord of Cinder is Gwyn, right? And he is the Lord of Cinder because he kindled the bonfire in order to try to make the Age of Fire last as long as it possibly could. So what does this tell us when they're talking about the story revolving around Lords of Cinder? For starters, they indicate that there is more than one, because clearly that creature that they show there, I'm assuming that was not Gwyn. I'm assuming that was another Lord of Cinder who probably kindled the bonfire as well to try and preserve the Age of Flame instead of going for the Age of Dark. And so these would be, I think the idea that they're going for, and again, this is a lot of just conjecture from my part. None of this is implied, but imagine that for From Software, right? Like Dark Souls started Dark Souls 1. Okay, let's just separate Dark Souls from Demon Souls for the purpose of lore, because they've already said that the lore is not directly connected. Even though I know there's a lot of fan lore, and I really like the fan lore that, you know, connects Dark Souls and Demon Souls. But for the purpose of discussion in terms of Dark Souls 3 lore, let's just say, okay, Dark Souls lore begins with Dark Souls 1. And in Dark Souls 1, you know, thousands or even millions of players who've played the game were forced to make a choice at the end, right? Some of them chose to go the dark path and extinguish the flame. Other ones Other of them chose to be the, the Lords of Cinder themselves and kindled the bonfire. I mean, you don't choose to be the Lord of Cinder, you just chose to kindle the bonfire, and you kind of became the Lord of Cinder by association because you essentially repeated the steps of Gwyn. So wouldn't it be cool if these Lords of Cinder would be a reference to all the players in Dark Souls 1 that chose the path of kindling the bonfire? So these would be like all the player characters from the past. Now, naturally, From Software is not going to draw on player characters and make bosses from it, but it would be cool if those bosses were a reference to those players who kindled the the first fire and the kiln the flame, and just like they became Lords of Cinder themselves. I think that would be awesome, and I think that is pretty cool. So there's a big theme around resurrecting these Lords of Cinder, and your main character is supposedly going to be a dark hero, so a hero who is fighting for the side of the dark. Let's say that essentially you have these two sides in Dark Souls, right? It's always been like that. You have the side of the dark, and you have the side of the fire. So your hero, it seems, in this game is going to be fighting for the side of the dark, and he's going to be taking out the Lords of Cinder, who are presumably fighting for the side of fire. Again, a lot of this is conjecture. Some of this was mentioned, like the dark hero killing Lords of Cinder. This was mentioned in the presentation, as well as the Lords of Cinder coming back was mentioned in the presentation as well. But this is kind of like me adding my own little take on that. Also, the game is featuring a bit of a unique visual style because Miyazaki constantly referred to this thing that he called the withered beauty or a faded beauty, like the one that you see in the screenshot where you see the faded sun that's like oozing down and stuff. So yeah, that is most of the stuff that I could take away from the lore. And I think it's pretty cool because a lot of people are discussing that this is going to be the last Dark Souls title. But I believe VaatiVidya, who apparently was also there, but I didn't get to meet him. It was a damn shame. I really wanted to meet him there. But VaatiVidya has said that it has already been confirmed that this is not going to be the last Souls game. So I'm assuming he might have had access to a little bit more information than I did, because I got to be honest, the Dark Souls 3 presentation for me was scheduled while I was at E3, so I had a pretty booked schedule, and I had to go do other stuff as well, so I couldn't hang around the Dark Souls 3 area as much as I wanted to. I basically saw the presentation, said my goodbyes to everybody that was there, and I had to peace out. But yeah, so to all the people saying that Dark Souls 3 is going to be the last one, please note that VaatiVidya has already said that is not going to be the case. And VaatiVidya is usually pretty right about most of the stuff that he says, so we're going to assume that he is correct. Okay, but now, more in terms of Dark Souls 3 itself. Let's talk about maps and level design. So we got interconnecting maps very much in the style of Bloodborne. As a matter of fact, one of the screenshots clearly showed this, and the gameplay that we've seen showed this as well. So you have those maps all interconnected, so it is not, I think the whole point of the game is not going to be a central hub. It is going to be more in line with Dark Souls 1, the interconnected world and such. I believe there's not going to be as many bonfire checkpoints as Dark Souls 2, since Miyazaki's back at the helm, and you know how Miyazaki feels about that stuff. Just take a look at how many checkpoints you had in Bloodborne versus the number of shortcuts that you had in Bloodborne. There were a lot more shortcuts that you would get over the, more bonfire, not bonfire, but more lamp checkpoints, so to speak. So that was a very good thing to see. The level design is looking a lot more like Dark Souls. So all of you who are scared of that linear design that we've seen in Dark Souls 2, that is not going to be the case from what I can tell in Dark Souls 3. So apart from that, there's a big sense of world scale and immersion. The world was huge from what we could tell, and there was a really big draw distance, so you could see a lot of buildings and bridges off in the distance. And something that they mentioned was that anything that you can see on screen, you can explore. And this means that you can explore every building, both from the inside and from the outside. Now, that is a bold statement right there. I mean, from the inside and the outside, there were a lot of buildings that were shown in the demo that we saw. So I'm almost scared that this might be some kind of translation mistake, but the translator clearly said that you'll be able to explore interiors of every building that you see. And that is just overwhelming as all hell, which means the game's probably going to be huge. I mean, the demo that we've seen alone it was pretty big. It had so many buildings in there and just towers and just stuff. So yeah. Let's see. What else we got? Oh yeah, and while we're talking about level design, there was a scene that was pretty interesting that happened throughout the gameplay that we were watching, which is first we saw this little stone dragon, which was kind of like still, he wasn't moving at all, and that dragon didn't really do anything. He was just like there, right? As you move through the level, you see another stone dragon, but this one breathes fire. So what happened in this scene is that you had two paths that you could choose to go to. So the path on the bottom had a bunch of like hollows and stuff, but they were all crumpled up. So by crumpled up, I mean like bundled up together, right? So they seemed like it was going to be pretty hard to get through all those hollows because they were all grouped up. So Miyazaki said, okay, so instead of going through here, we're going to take the higher ground, and we're going to try to go through there because this one seems like it's going to be pretty hard. So once he gets to high ground, there's a dragon there, starts spewing fire at you, right? Because, you know, kind of Dark Souls 1, you have the Hellkite Drake, whatever, right at that bridge section. And in Demon Souls, you have the same thing in that bridge section. There's the dragon that keeps shooting fire at you. And Miyazaki revealed, I really like putting dragons at the start of the game. So you get there, dragon starts spewing fire, and you're just like, okay, maybe I should go through the bottom portion now. But what happened was the dragon is breathing fire both on the upper section as well as the lower section now. So due to the fact that you tried exploring a different path, now the lower path was compromised as well because the dragon was breathing fire there. But the dragon did also kill all of the hollows that were down there. So now you had an easier time in terms of enemies, but you also had to time your passage through that lower section to make sure that the dragon wouldn't hit you with a flame breath while you were going through that section. Now, in terms of movement, I've already mentioned that the whole movement and the whole controls in general, the game in general feels more like Dark Souls 1 and Bloodborne than Dark Souls 2, and the movement definitely shows that. They even said later on that the player character is going to move faster, and he was moving pretty damn fast because he was like in full plate armor, but he was still moving pretty fast for someone in full plate armor. Like at least a lot faster than what you would see in Dark Souls 2 for sure. Because Dark Souls 2, the movement there was super slow, right? So that is going to be something that they want in the game. They want players to be able to move faster, but I'm pretty sure you can still, you know, make those really super tanky builds with heavier armor and still be a slow walking tank if that's like your playstyle. I think that is still going to be a viable way to do it. So I noted here new elements and improvements. There's just so much new stuff to the game. Like the combat feels different. Again, we didn't get to play it. We just got to watch it. But it definitely felt different. There was what they call a further deepening of sword action. And what they mean by this is they've added new action elements utilizing specific features for specific weapons, which I believe is what that website, the No, was referring to as sword arts. So those sword arts are a pretty big deal because those are essentially special attacks, and it seems that each weapon type, I'm not sure if it's going to be each weapon. I mean, maybe if you get like a really special weapon or something and it's the same, it's still a straight sword, maybe it will have a different special attack, but it seems that for now it's going to be more about weapon types than necessarily specific weapons. So, for instance, the straight sword's special attack is kind of like a lunge that you can do that really propels you forward and you can do an attack. And that also, if I remember correctly, that was also used as a guard break. Another special attack that they showed us was the greatsword special attack, which could lift targets into the air and again also do guard break. They didn't really show kick. At least that I can remember. They didn't show any kicks, so maybe we have to use these special attacks now in order to perform guard breaks. And the special attacks do require, you know, precise timing to really get in there. And the special attacks affect also the position of your character for the most part. So you have to really pay close attention to what you're doing and how you position yourself in regards to your enemy, because it's not going to be like a spell that you're going to be doing from afar and your character's just going to like, you know, get in there and attack the enemy. You're going to have to really be on point if you want to get these special attacks off. All the special attacks that I've seen were accompanied by like a a little white trail that would be behind your weapon. So whenever you would do a special attack, your character would leave a little white trail behind it to indicate that is the special attack. So like I said, the Greatsword special would lift targets, which doesn't really surprise me. I mean, I believe we've seen a bunch of attacks with Greatswords in both Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2 that would like lift targets up into the air. So you can expect more of that. The Scimitar's special attack. Now, the Scimitar is actually another thing that I would like to talk. I'm going through my notes in random order at this point, but I would like to talk about the Scimitar because the Scimitar was an interesting weapon, and I even had to ask a question at the end of the presentation. Because I was very curious about that. But essentially, Scimitar is one item that he picked up, right? So it's not two swords that he picked up. He picked up one item. This one item constituted of two swords, which he equipped two scimitars at once when he picked that one item. And that was something that allowed him to dual wield. Now, they did say the classic dual wield is also there, which means if you really want to, you can dual wield whichever two weapons you want. But they also going to have these items, which are like two items already combined, and they will be ready for dual wielding. Now, you're not forced into dual wielding these items because like when he picked them up, he was still wielding the shield and one scimitar, and you could see the other scimitar was like sheeted on his belt. But then he switched into dual wielding mode, and he showed off the special attack of this unique scimitar that contained two weapons in one. And that special attack was basically a spinning AoE attack, which was pretty damn cool. In our presentation, he was able to take out quite a couple of hollows with one of those attacks. So it's an attack designed for AoE, but obviously more for weaker enemies, I kind of feel like. So yeah, there you go. Those are the special attacks. A lot of them are for guard break. Again, I don't know what the deal is in terms of guard breaks with kick. Didn't see any of that. Also, as far as I can remember, I was trying to remember now, I don't think we've seen any plunging attacks, but I'm pretty sure those are going to be in the game as well. We did see backstabs and parries, and they are very much like Dark Souls 1 and not like Dark Souls 2, whereas if you remember in Dark Souls 2, you do a parry, you have to wait until the enemy falls down, then you go in there and you get the blow in. And this one was like parry, just riposte immediately, that was it, which was pretty cool. Kind of prefer that, because I kind of missed a lot of parries in Dark Souls 2. As a matter of fact, I kind of just gave up on parrying altogether most of the time, unless it was really, really required of me. Something that they also mentioned that they're trying to get, the field they're trying to go for with the Greatsword was that it is a reproduction of the Guts battle style from the Berserk anime or whatever. I don't know. I haven't seen that particular show, so I don't know. But those of you guys that are fans of Dark Souls, you're constantly talking about Guts and Berserk and all that. So they say that is what they're going for with the Greatsword. Now, another thing that I've noticed was the short bow that they've talked about. At some point, they picked up a short bow, and they were talking about how they wanted the short bow to be a lot faster than a regular bow, right? So as he was just like shooting that short bow, it was ridiculously fast. Like he was shooting it super close range with an enemy right in front of him. Like if you guys remember in Dark Souls 1, one of the fastest bows, I believe, was probably the composite bow. It was faster than that, considerably faster. So it is somewhat viable if you want to, like, you know, pull out your bow and get a couple of shots in. Like, say, maybe the first thing that came to mind when he showed that mechanic was like, you know, pull out a bow, poison arrows, boom, 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 get someone poisoned, switch back into a regular weapon, beat the crap out of them while they're poisoned. You know, that seems like a valid play style at this point. It also allows you to punish enemies that maybe are trying to, you know, charge a really powerful attack and you don't want to be next to them. Just move away, pull out the short bow, bang, 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 you're good to go. They didn't show longbow, but they did say that the intention is the longbows are going to take longer. They're also going to deal more damage, and probably have more reach, I'm assuming, but they're also going to take longer to load. So it's not just like every bow is going to be super fast. Their idea is like, a short bow is faster, like a lot faster. It can be used not in close combat per se, but, you know, pretty medium range combat. You can just like get a lot of shots in if you really do your job right. So that is most of the stuff that I got from the movement of the game as well as the attacks of the game. The whole thing feels, like I said, a combination of Bloodborne and Dark Souls 1, because the character is moving faster And all of the like critical attacks and stuff are also faster, like in Dark Souls versus as opposed to Dark Souls 2. So everything just seems more in line with those two games, right? Just faster action. But at the same time, you still have the weight of the weapons behind it, like with the greatsword and that stuff. You could really feel the weight, the impact behind the weapons that you are swinging, which is, in my opinion, a good thing, because I kind of do like that faster playstyle. And it also means that, at least I believe that is going to be the case, like players who choose to be really light in Dark Souls 3, they're going to be like lightning fast. They're going to be insane, taken from the speed that I've seen this armored character, or maybe the armored character was just overpowered for the sake of the demo. I don't know. That's kind of like, reaching at straws at this point. It's a lot of conjecture. Gee, I can't pronounce this damn word. But yeah, that's a lot of me just, trying to figure stuff out from what I've seen in the gameplay. Now, another mechanic that they've shown, and this one, maybe I should have talked about it when I was talking about the lore, that you will find these small graves as you go throughout the game. We found one which was actually inside a building, I believe. That I kind of thought that was weird. But anyways, these small graves, they allow you to offer a flame to these graves, and then you can read the grave's epitaph and learn more about the lore of the world. Now, they didn't mention any of this in connection with that heat-up mechanic for the bosses, but I was kind of thinking, like, you're offering flames to a grave. Maybe that is going to be what makes that heat-up mechanic for the bosses. Maybe that's the thing. Now, when the channel The Know talked about the heat-up mechanic, they showed a character who had a spear, and then they showed that same character attacking you, but he was just like this black mass with eyes. We saw that happen during the presentation, but it wasn't a boss fight. It was just like a regular hollow, except this hollow just exploded in this black liquid and then began to form a shape similar to what you guys have seen in that screenshot. And that was kind of weird, because that undead just seemed to become ridiculously powerful. And I can't remember if the guy who was playing the game died at that point. He might have died at that point, and then he chose a different path or whatever. He went for a special shortcut that allowed him to go straight to the boss. But yeah, that undead was seriously tearing him up, because he was super fast and he was just going completely hog wild on him. So yeah, that was pretty impressive to see. I'm not sure what that mechanic is about, but again, since it happened shortly after he did the small grave offering thing, they didn't directly associate to do things in the presentation. That's just me, drawing some conclusions from what I've seen. But I kind of feel that is going to be the link that is going to happen. Again, none of this has been confirmed. It's just me coming up with stuff. Now, in terms of difficulty, this was something that I thought was very interesting. And again, I'm wondering if it was a mistake in translation, but the translator clearly said this after something that Miyazaki said. He clearly said this: the difficulty level is going to be higher. Okay, you heard me right. If this is right, they're not just going for maintaining that difficulty level. They want the difficulty to be higher. But at the same time, they're giving you more tools so that you can get the job done. Like, for instance, one of the things that they mentioned was that the player character is going to move faster. There's improved character control. I don't know what they mean by improved character control. I mean, of course, it seemed, like I said, the control of the character seemed a lot better than what I saw in Dark Souls 2. But again, I would have to play to really get an idea if that is the case or not, and I did not get to play. Beyond the difficulty level is higher, something that they said is the enemy placement is designed to kill you. They specifically said this: the enemy placement is designed to get you dead. A couple of things that they've shown were, some of those typical Dark Souls traps where, you see something in a level and you're drawn to something. Like you go into a room, you see a light somewhere, you see a bunch of books or whatever, you're looking around, you're trying to explore, and the enemy comes up from behind you and stabs you, That's the kind of stuff. That happened at least 2 or 3 times throughout the demo that we were watching. So you can expect plenty of ambushes as you go throughout the game. And beyond that, they also showed some knight enemies, which Miyazaki referenced those knights in comparison with the knights that you've seen in Demon Souls. So you remember like the red-eyed knights or the blue-eyed knights, like the first time that you encountered those, they were pretty damn challenging, right? Because you wouldn't know the proper way to deal with them. And he came up with these new knights for Dark Souls 3. They looked pretty friggin' OP. As a matter of fact, there's one point where the guy who was playing, he aggroed 2 of those knights in one of the sections, and he did what all of us, at least most of us, do, which is he ran around and basically tried to separate them and kill them one at a time. So yeah, but those knight enemies, they're pretty hardcore. They're not fooling around. They kicked his ass a little bit. He didn't really die at those, but he came kind of close. At least I think, because I couldn't see the health bar, but he definitely took a lot of damage. And obviously they want to keep the theme of formidable difficulty for a great sense of accomplishment. Because at the end of the day, I keep telling people, Dark Souls and Souls-like games are not really about the difficulty. They're about the accomplishment that you get for overcoming the challenges that they place in front of you. So again, just another thing that I wanted to highlight before I leave the difficulty thing is they did say the difficulty level is higher. And I can't wait to see what that means. Okay, so let's see. We talked about the stuff that oozed out of the undead, where he became a huge disformed beast. So, okay, the boss character. So he fought a boss as well. The boss was actually kind of weird. It was unlike any boss that I've really seen in Dark Souls in a way. Basically, this boss looked like an armored bride with some kind of an ethereal veil. They called it the Dancer of the Frigid Valley. And he was like doing all kinds of weird movement patterns, like bending in ways that people aren't meant to bend. So it kind of arced back a little bit. I mean, if you remember, Artorias also did, the little bit of the exaggerated movements. This one goes even one step further. The boss was a lot bigger than your character, but it was pretty slim, and he was wielding 2 scimitars, I think. And at some point, one of the scimitars became flaming. One of the other scimitars was like ethereal, and he was just kicking all kinds of ass. This was the final bit of the presentation. So eventually the guy who was playing died to the boss, and Miyazaki said that was intentional because they don't want to show you what it's like after you kill the boss. So yeah, with an erratic movement pattern, it was a pretty interesting boss fight. I mean, I can't get into too many details because, like I said, I've seen so much stuff in E3 that it's just kind of hard for me to remember every specific detail of every little thing I saw. And you couldn't record or take pictures or videotape any of that presentation. So there was that as well. They talked a little bit about the fountains and offering players to death as a sacrifice and how that was going to be somewhat mixed into the online system, but they didn't go into too much detail about that stuff. Naturally, some of the people who were there, considering that a lot of the people who were there, like I told you, were hardcore members of the community, like Peverson, Dreaded Cone, Ouroboros, all those people. There was obviously the question placed about online and what was going to be the metric that was going to be used to partner players with each other. And a matter of fact, someone even mentioned, are we going to be seeing a return of soul memory? And Miyazaki was like, soul memory thus? Like, I have no idea what they're talking about. So basically, the translator was saying that you can expect to see what you can expect to see in terms of online matchmaking is mainly soul level. And soul level was the only thing that they mentioned, which is really, really good because let's face it, I don't think anybody really liked that much about. I don't think a lot of people liked soul memory. At least that's what I got from that. Particularly after they added the ring, it might have even gotten worse. The agape ring or whatever. I think that might have even gotten worse because now people can invade people even earlier. I don't know. I just don't really like the mechanic of that ring. But anyway, yeah, that's pretty much all that they talked about. And yeah, so all of the insecurities that I had about Dark Souls 3 when I made the previous video, which I have to be honest, I was insecure about a lot of stuff. I kept thinking it was too soon. Like, those insecurities were gone the second I watched that presentation because it looks really polished. It looks really, like I said, a mixture of Dark Souls 1 with Bloodborne, which is what I wanted. I wanted them not to use the Dark Souls 2 engine, which I believe is the case. The game looks gorgeous. The gameplay looked awesome from what I've seen. The combat looked solid. The sword arts thing looks like it's not going to be just a gimmick. It is going to bring, you know, a little bit more utility for certain weapons, because sometimes some weapons just like they don't deal enough damage to justify using them. And with the addition of sword arts, sometimes you might just have a weapon that you use for a specific move set, for a specific attack that it does, and that might bring additional utilities to weapons, which was really good to see. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have to talk about in terms of Dark Souls 3. If you have any specific questions, leave them in the comments. I'm going to try to answer as much of those as I can from what I've seen in the presentation. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.